Welcome back to American Christian or Christian American, or welcome if it's your first time. If you are seeing this for the first time, after you watch this video, I would encourage you to go back and look at some of the first videos. Even if you don't want to watch all of them, if you can watch at least the first one and a few others, you'll get an idea of the background that I've set for this. Yes, I have improved over time. Do I have improvement to go? Of course I do. But still, there's some vital information in the earlier videos that will help you that all were started this year. April 1st was 2025 was the first one. Now, before we go on, just a reminder, if you can push that like button if you like this video, so other people, more people will be able to see it, and push that subscribe button. You'll be able to get my videos faster. And it helps grow this channel so we can get more information to more people. As I've said several times, this is a journey. This is a journey that we are taking together. And I'm learning as I go. I mean, I've been learning for years. So I didn't just come to this just because I started learning a few months ago. But the learning process never quits. And there is so much out here that it's impossible to know all of it anyway. So the journey continues. Today we're going to talk about public transit and racism. First of all, we're going to go back in history quite a bit, and we're going to have a video clip about a transit company that was set up by African Americans. And then we'll talk about present issues and present problems. All right.
In the heart of the Jim Crow South, 1926. Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 13 black men pooled their money, not for survival, but for power. They called it Safe Bus Company. At a time when black folks were banned from white-owned transit, these men built their own fleet, their own schedules, their own rules. They started with just a few buses. But before long, Safe Bus was carrying over 2.5 million passengers a year. Black-owned, black-run, black-driven. They weren't just transporting people, they were moving a movement. By the 1940s, it had become the largest black-owned transportation company in the entire world. Proof that when we unite, invest, and build, we don't just survive, we dominate. To my people, I ask, how many of us today are willing to do what they did?
Okay, so we're talking about different points in history because it's relevant. It changes. 1926, the time of this African American bus company, buses were still making profits. That's not so today. Up until the 1950s, buses were making profits. Bus companies existed, and it was a profit-making venture. What happened? Well, too many people started to get cars, and so therefore transit went down. Now, transit has always had a place, though, because there are people who can't afford cars, and there's also cities today which are so populated that transit becomes a necessity. Now, New York City, I believe, has always had a stronger transit company because New York is crammed together, and so therefore owning a car there can be problematic. Where do you keep it? How much do you have to pay to park someplace, have a parking garage? Is there enough space to do that? So certain areas of the country, public transit maintained a strong foothold. Chicago also did, but not as much as New York. Anyway, so in the 1950s, public transit started to struggle to earn a profit. And they were no longer making a profit after the 1950s. They didn't even bring enough money to survive. By the 1970s, private transit companies were collapsing. Okay? So, but first of all, let's go back again to this bus company. So black people weren't accepted on white transit. So they built their own. And so they serviced the black community because understanding that the poverty of the black community has always made public transit a necessity. Now, it also is a necessity with many white communities as well. It's also a necessity for people who are disabled and cannot drive, or for people who perhaps shouldn't drive. there's all kinds of reasons. And today, environmental reasons also because of heavy traffic. Some people don't earn enough money to have a house and a car, and they decide, my grandparents decided that they couldn't afford to have a house and a car, both. And there was rumors also he couldn't drive very well. But they legitimately could not afford to own a car and own a house. So they got a house, but they relied on public transit in the Twin Cities area. So what happened now during the 1970s was the collapse of all of these private transit systems. And so people were going to be in trouble. So many areas, now again, New York maintained itself because people were still taking it, but other areas of cities that were not so large. I'm from Minneapolis, St. Paul. The Twin City Transit, trying to think, it was a Twin City Transit Authority or whatever, I think that's what it was. Whatever it was, they were collapsing. So what happened was the state decided to buy them out. And when the state did that, in order to have public transit, it became publicly funded, meaning tax dollars were involved. Pretty much all transit systems today need public funds to survive. Now, exceptions might be for New York. I don't know what the ratio is. They might take in enough revenue because of the density of revenue. That the more people that ride a transit system, the revenue goes up. And so the costs go down. And so I don't know exactly where they sit, but if they needed any revenue, it would probably be very small. But many cities need that revenue for transit to continue. It still remains a public good, though, because it can reduce traffic conditions in cities that have major traffic problems, like the Twin Cities and other cities as well, where public transit gives people an option to get out of their cars. But it inevitably deals with the poor as well, poor people who cannot afford to own a car or perhaps can't afford a car at the moment. Public transit can be a transition to get from an impoverished life to getting to better jobs. And perhaps they will take public transit ongoing for their life, or they might graduate to going to a car. And then some of them might get a car and use it sometimes and use public transit other times, if the public transit system is a good functioning transit system. And not all are. It also, again, people who are disabled, who may not be able to get around otherwise, public transit gives them an option. Now, there are systems like Minnesota's Metro Mobility and other places they call them, where they take people to doctor's appointments and other things for the people who have a great deal of disabilities. But the regular bus lines, especially now that they accept wheelchairs and stuff like that, they give an option for people to go work at regular jobs, make a good living, and there are visually impaired people who make a living with a job that makes them just as much as a person who is able-bodied. But they need public transit to get there. So all these things are important. But there is a problem, too, that many of our cities and locations, especially in the South, do not support public transit. Why? Well, first of all, let's point out some different things. I'm going to pull up some different documents and we're going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about 11 states with terrible public transit system, but we're not going to focus on all the states. First state that's mentioned is Mississippi. Mississippi consistently ranks as one of the worst states for public transportation due to its lack of funding and limited options. So let's go down another one. Alabama, a car-centric state with poor public transit infrastructure. Alabama's public transportation system is severely underdeveloped, forcing most residents to rely on cars. In major cities like Birmingham and Montgomery, bus services are limited and often fail to cover the entire metropolitan area. Routes are infrequent, making it difficult for workers to commute efficiently. Tennessee, South Carolina, Arkansas, Kentucky, West Virginia, North Dakota. South Dakota public transit is barely an afterthought. And Idaho and Montana. Now, I'm not going to focus on all these areas because I am focusing on issues related to racism. Now, so we're going to talk a little bit about Mississippi, but I'll tell you why I'm not going to talk as deeply on that one. We're definitely going to talk about Alabama and Tennessee, South Carolina. I'm not going to talk as much about Arkansas in this. Kentucky, definitely. And then I'm not going to talk about these areas. Main reason I'm not going to talk about these areas because they're highly white populations. They are very sparsely populated, and it does make public transit a more difficult option. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, so out of these states, I'm going to focus on a couple of different states. Now, Mississippi definitely has a huge problem with racism. Part of the reason that I'm not going to focus on public transit there as much is Mississippi is not heavily populated. And so you could argue that because the state is smaller, that it may be more difficult to set up public transit. I agree and I disagree. I think part of the reason that Mississippi lags behind is because they don't invest in themselves. And they're also so focused on racial, trying to put black people down in the state, with the highest population is in Mississippi, which we'll look at that in a second, that they don't invest in the state in the first place. But because they don't have a huge, large metropolitan areas, or at least somewhat large metropolitan areas, I'm not going to focus on Mississippi as much. But you can still draw some conclusions. We're going to look at some data on that as well. So we're going to look at some more stuff, some more documents here. This here, this is page 10, poorest states in the United States for 2024. We can get this a little bit bigger here. Let's see if it will work. Apparently it's not allowing me to increase it. But Mississippi is number 1. There it goes. And is it allowing? It's not allowing me to get the number. Mississippi is number 1 of the poorest states. I think it was something like 19% below the poverty line. 2 is Louisiana, which I'm not actually focusing on this as much, but it can be included. 3 is New Mexico. 4, West Virginia. You can see all these states in here, though, are actually ranked in the poor zone. Kentucky ranks 6th in the country for the poorest state. Alabama 7th. You notice places like Minneapolis or Minnesota is 47th poorest, which means that they're actually one of the wealthier states. But they also make tons of investments in themselves. California is 24th. It has poverty in a state, but also has great wealth. Washington State is 43rd. New York is the 12th. So see, it has a lot of poverty in New York, especially because of all the high prices and stuff. Texas is the 11th. A lot of the states that are the lowest are in the South. Okay. And the South is, of course, where slavery took place, where Jim Crow was the highest, and all these other things that took place against black people. So I'm trying to make a correlation here. Look at Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky has a larger African American population. The state itself doesn't necessarily, but it is very, very segregated and has maintained that segregation for years. So how do they maintain that? Well, there's many reasons, all different policies that don't build things up. The 2 areas I understand are the West End and then also Newburgh, where not all, but much of the African American population lives in these 2 particular areas. And there are not a lot of job opportunities in these areas. There's some, but not enough. The better paying jobs require them to get out of these areas. And so public transportation is necessary to do that. Now, years ago, they fought to get public transportation and they got some funding for it, but the funding has recently is not paying for what is necessary. So public transportation in Louisville, Kentucky is being cut back. So they need further funding, but there is little to no effort to do that. There is some talk about it, but the system is continuing to grow and making life harder for people. So now let's summarize this stuff and talk about this. All right, so let's think about what we've talked about in recent times as well. First of all, we talked about what is the reason that we don't have universal health care in this country. If you haven't seen that, go back. It's just a few videos before this. The reason we don't have universal health care in this country is racism. Many people hope that African Americans would get sick and die off. They didn't care whether they lived or died. They wanted them gone. The reason that we don't have Medicare at 100% is because that 20% they were hoping African Americans couldn't afford that. They would get sick and die. None of it's happened, but that was the real reason why we didn't have health care. We talked about education. Reagan was a racist. We caught him. We got a video, recorded message talking to Nixon, because Nixon loved to record things. And Reagan talked about how some people from the African nations, the leaders, were monkeys that just got out of the trees and barely learned how to put on shoes. Well, Reagan was the one who started to add tuition to college fees, because before that it was practically free, or there were very, very few costs. So this was an attempt to keep who they wanted educated. And you say, well, what about they were hurting white people? Right. They didn't care about, they only care about their select group, the elite. The poor white people are just casualties of war, and they might even side with African Americans. So they didn't care about them either. But these things were a direct attempt to get rid of black people. And then we talked about the Republican who said about John Marshall in Louisville, who said when he talked about to two, in his own private accounts, responded to two young black professionals after the Trump election what they should do, and he informed them that they should be aware that the majority of people in Kentucky do not care what happens to black people, and many of them would do black people harm given the opportunity. And this white politician got up and said, he should be removed because he's racist and drawing on hate. And as we talked about then, no, he was not. The white population is the part that's racist. The white leaders, the white Republicans, who are the ones that are racist, they are simply responding. John Marshall was responding, and he wasn't doing it on his job account with Jefferson County Public Schools. He was doing his own private information. He just got out there. He was telling these two young black professionals to be aware. He wasn't saying to hate white people. He was telling the truth, that the majority of white people would do you harm. And he was calling for the resignation of John Marshall. Well, the reason he was doing that was because of buck breaking. And we also talked about that. There are different ways of buck breaking, which means taking a prominent African American male or the alpha male and breaking him down, humiliating him. And so other black people will be afraid and not stand up for their rights. So it may not have been a sexual assault situation like buck breaking did take place during slavery, but it was an attempt to get him out of that job, making $200,000 a year, and to humiliate him so other people would be afraid. But he didn't do that, thank goodness. So we have to understand that every single thing that happens in this country, especially in the South, and Kentucky is part of that. It may not have been part of the Civil War as far as being in the Confederacy, but they still have much of the attitudes of the Confederacy. And so we have to understand that they would do anything. Many of these people, not everybody, of course. I'm not one of those people. There are many people who are not pro this, but there are many more people who are, will do anything to keep Black Americans down in order to keep them subjugated, to keep them demoralized, dehumanized. Public transit is a way that can help people get out of that. And I believe the evidence shows that here's these poor states in the South who don't want to fund public transit properly. It is a way to keep Black Americans from getting better jobs. It is a way to keep Black Americans from succeeding. And it has a strong effect. And there are those who escape, but it keeps many more people down. In a time when this country is sitting here trying to bring more white people in, trying to deport people who are not white, trying to block people from coming into the country, unless, of course, they're white South Africans. So this is all about racism. The fact that Birmingham does not have a good public transit system. Now, I know they have a Black mayor now, but they need the support of the state in many cases. And there's only so many resources that they can do. Now, Louisville, Kentucky, theirs is funded for the most part by the local areas. Like Louisville, the state only provides about $2 million a year for public transit approximately. And so they're not going to give any more. Now, the governor is, Andy Beshear is a good governor, but there are so many Republicans who are racist controlling the legislature in Kentucky. It's not going to happen there. And then you have too many racist people in the city council of Louisville. It's not going to happen there to increase public funds. So unless people stand up to resist these people, they're going to continue on with their racist agenda. South Carolina, also terrible public transit, not reliable. Tennessee, growing, not having good public transit. All these are in the southern area. All these contain white racist ideas. Tennessee was the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan in Pulaski, Tennessee, I'm sorry. And in Tennessee, Mississippi, the same way. Now, just think about it's broader than just transit. These states have kept up such a racist attitude. We talked about recently that the 6 police officers in Mississippi who brutalized 2 Black men. One was shot through the mouth and went out his neck. Luckily, didn't his spinal cord, but his face is numb. They received $2.5 million. They're going to jail, but regardlessly, this stuff keeps going on. And what you have to think about, these states have spent more time keeping African Americans down, and they're not investing in their states. So the states remain a burden on the U.S. in the sense that more money has to come from the federal government than they put in, while other states like Minnesota and others who have invested in themselves, we'll talk about this more later, have bring more money to the federal government than they take out. Now, it's okay to a point, but when you are a state that continues to do this, continues to live off the backs of others, continues to have your wealthy citizens benefit by not paying higher taxes because you won't invest in the state, you become a welfare state. Not the individuals, but the state itself and the rich recipients who are also a welfare recipient. The poor don't always have a choice. The rich do. They will do anything, including keeping public transit and other things down. These areas will not provide good public transportation unless the people demand it. The problem is too much in these areas. People have been beaten down so much that they have a hard time standing up. They're tired. But unless people do stand up against these racist people, it won't change. Louisville will not get better transportation, in public transportation. It will just get worse unless people stand up against this racist agenda to not fund public transit. Birmingham will not get good public transportation unless people stand up. The Carolinas won't get it, or South Carolina won't get it. Georgia won't get it. MARTA in Georgia, we said, well, it has rail, it has this. MARTA is way under what it needs to be and very expensive for a 9th largest metropolitan area in the country. Traffic in Atlanta, Georgia is horrific. They need a much better investment in public transit. Mississippi keeps itself at the bottom because it's trying to hurt African Americans. They have some of the highest incarceration rates in the country. But it keeps African Americans down, and it keeps white power. We need good public transportation system for African Americans, but not just African Americans. We need it for poorer whites, people who shouldn't be driving because of disabilities. People can't drive because of disabilities. There's some that can, or people who just aren't good drivers. We need people who make that choice. It makes more room on the roads for other people. In the long run, it's cheaper to invest in a public transit system than to expand all the roads as you grow. And perhaps a metropolitan area would really grow if the standards were raised up, if the standard of living was raised up. It is also a true fact that when transit comes in and puts a substantial investment in public transit, more businesses come to town. For instance, Minnesota has been investing in light rail. And along the light rail lines they've put up, which is 2 so far, they got a 3rd one in construction, a 4th one in planning. There have been several $1 billion of private infrastructure investments because they know that, unlike a bus, the rail system is going to be there for many, many years to come. And so the investment in public transit and the investment in business, the investment in education is why Minnesota ranks way up there as far as not impoverished cities, the 47th state of how, you have number 1 is the most poorest, and then you go up to Minnesota, 47th, practically at 50, meaning that they are not a poor state. They are a wealthy state. They have higher taxes. But by paying those taxes and investing in things, there's better jobs. So people earn more money, and the rich people earn more money too. Now, I'm not saying there's not racism in Minnesota. There's racism with George Floyd and stuff like that, but there's still overall more investment in education and everything else. There are racist politicians there too that have to be worked on. But the Deep South and the southern areas have off-the-chain Republican control that keeps people down and keeps public transit down because they don't want the people rising up and be able to take care of themselves and to be able to rival them for power. Until the next time on American Christian or Christian American.